Hello and welcome to Useful Idiots Monday Morning, where we react to the Sunday morning shows that we watch so you don't have to. I'm Katie Halper.
And I'm Maté.
And please make sure you like the stream. Everyone just do a little like, hit the like, smash the like the smash. Also, make sure that you check out our call-in right after this. The link to that is in the description. And that's just, if you don't know about call-ins, just a free app you can access on your phones and then ask us questions. Alrighty, so much to talk about. Should we just get into it?
Let's do it.
All right, let's do it. All right, let's do it. First clip is a nice morning recap from Chuck Todd. The Chuckster.
And a good Sunday morning, we've seen the world rally around Ukraine, moved by its fierce resistance in moments like this one. This is what Ukrainian officials say is the shooting down of a Russian helicopter. But it is also true that the worst of this war is yet to come for Ukraine. Yesterday, Vladimir Putin, in a pretty menacing way, threatened Ukraine with its statehood as Russian forces bombed military targets and civilians alike, laying waste to Ukrainian cities, violating some small humanitarian corridors. There's panic in places like Kyiv, where people are jamming rail stations, desperate to get out before an expected full Russian assault on the capital. Russia does control areas in the south and east of Ukraine. They're aiming to cut Ukraine off from the sea and trap its army internally. Vladimir Putin, meanwhile, in his own country, signed a new law cracking down on free speech, making it a possible crime in Russia to call this what it actually is, which is a...
You know, this is the longest we've gone with not fact-checking Chuck Todd. This has actually been relatively, for him, pretty factual so far. This is crazy.
What's going on?
Usually by now, within 2 seconds, we're like, no, Chuck, actually, sorry. You got that wrong. But so far, actually, this is, not that far off. Now, of course, the part he's leaving out is that the U.S. is using Ukraine as cannon fodder and flooding it with weapons instead of getting behind a negotiated peace deal. But in terms of when he's describing Russian actions, it's actually pretty accurate.
Go Chuck.
Go Chuck.
War.
Impressive.
And with the Russian economy crippled by sanctions, Putin is actually now calling that a declaration of war. There are growing concerns that a cornered Putin could lash out and widen this conflict beyond Ukraine's borders.
Okay, here we go. All right, Chuck. Now you slipped up. Okay.
All right.
And because now he's saying that, look, you know what's so funny about this narrative? On the one hand, everyone's saying the Ukrainians are crushing the Russians. The Russians can't even get into Kiev because of the brave Ukrainian resistance. But they're also saying the Russians are going to go elsewhere. Right. If they can't even win in Ukraine, how are they going to go elsewhere, especially with the army of their size? It
Imperial ambition. Where there's a will, there's a way. Necessity is the mother of invention.
Yeah.
Just spitballing some ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The narrative doesn't make sense. But anyway, that's the Chuckster for you.
Yeah, just laying some things out, laying out some themes. Should we go to our first clip of a politician?
Sure.
Let's go to Joe Manchin.
We're on this Zoom with President Zelensky yesterday. Before I get into the details, just, what was that like with him? What did he say to you guys?
It was so surreal, but to have a person there.
What was that like experientially? What were your senses? What was your vibe? What was the vibe?
What were you feeling? Yeah.
Was it a good vibe? Talking to a wartime leader being bombed? What was it like? Anyway.
It was surreal.
Surreal. It was trippy, man. It was trippy.
On the front lines, taking mortars every day and basically seeing his people being slaughtered and willing to withstand all of this and fight back. And all he asked for was basically, just help me. I'll fight my own fight. Just give me the tools to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And
all he asked for is World War III,
right?
Where we impose a no-fly zone and have to shoot down Russian jets and lead to nuclear war. That's all he's asking for.
Yeah, that's all he's asking for is a little World War III enabling. Yeah.
For us to hesitate, or anyone to hesitate in the free world, is wrong. And he said that. He said, listen, if Ukraine falls, then Europe may fall.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you want to stop?
So what does that mean for you? Are you right now, would you support?
Again, back to the same thing. Their narrative makes no sense. Russia can't even take Ukraine. They're being bogged down by heroic Ukrainian resistance. But also Russia's also going to take Europe.
Yeah.
It's crazy talk. It's crazy talk.
a no-fly zone.
I
Would you support doing this, which could trigger a wider conflict?
I understand that, but right now you don't signal to the nemesis of Putin. This is a Putin's war. This is not the Russian people's war. This is Putin's war and his quest for whatever it may be. But to take anything off the table thinking we might not be able to use things because we've already taken them off the table is wrong. I would take nothing off the table, but I would be very clear that we're going to support the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian president, and this government every way humanly possible. Zelensky was very clear. He says, we don't need you to fight our fight. We don't need you to fly our planes or fly your planes into our war zone. Mm-hmm. We need the planes that we can fly ourselves, and we have them on the border.
Okay, well, that's also a contradiction because Zelensky is asking for a U.S. enforced no-fly zone, which means he is asking for the U.S. to fight their fight, because that would put the U.S. in direct conflict with Russian planes and force the U.S. to attack Russian anti-aircraft missiles, which are inside of Russia. So that's a straight-up fabrication. And as for the planes, there are some planes that Ukraine could get, but it's not clear actually that Ukrainians know how to fly them. I'm not sure if Manchin is being accurate there. I'd have to look more into that, but I wouldn't take that claim on faith.
Is there more? Is that it?
That was the end of that clip, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So he's saying that sanctions are not off the table.
Not
sanctions. No-fly zone.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. He doesn't want a no-fly zone, aka World War III, taken off of the table, aka nuclear war.
Right.
Yeah.
You got
It's a wide table. It's a wide table.
You
have to have room for World War III and nuclear war.
Yeah. It's a smorgasbord.
It's a smorgasbord
that we need up there. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. All right. Let's keep it moving.
All right. What's next? That's very funny. Our next clip.
Logistically, how doable is this? And why are so many folks in the United States adamant about not even attempting it?
Okay, Aaron, can you set up?
Let me start with the back end because I think it's.
This man speaking is Admiral James Stavridis. I'm pronouncing that wrong. He's from a peace organization known as the Carlyle Group. Katie, have you heard of the Carlyle Group? They just basically, they're a group of.
They're like Code Pink, right?
They're like Code Pink. Yeah, they're like the Code Pink of the Beltway. They're just a group of former government officials who use their experience to advocate for peace by profiting off of the weapons that are used to fuel wars. It's they're a great bunch of guys. And of course, I don't think they mention when these people come on the show that they're part of companies that profit off of war. But this guy, Admiral James, is one of them.
And admirable, yeah. And the Carlyle Group, in all seriousness, is an American multinational private equity, alternative asset management, and financial services corporation that does a lot of war profiteering.
Yes. Let's hear from the Admiral.
It's really the important question. It's quite obvious that if we put U.S. NATO jets in the air enforcing a no-fly zone, they'll be going nose to nose with Russian fighter aircraft. Down that path, the potential for miscalculation in a war between NATO and Russia and a war between Russia and the United States rises significantly. Look, I implemented a no-fly zone. I know how to do this. I did it in Libya in 2011. Can we do it?
Look, I know how to destroy countries.
Yeah.
I know how to create
humble brag. That's a flex. Yeah. Open air slave markets. You're welcome.
I know how to massacre civilians. I've done it. Okay. I've done it. I know how to do it. I did it. And I'm still allowed to speak in public.
Yeah. And leave my house. Yeah. It is, again, it speaks to like the total lack of accountability, the total impunity, the lack of reckoning with what the United States did or what NATO did, what the Western powers did in Libya. Like that should be a shameful thing to bring up and not part of your resume that you bring up.
Yes, yes, yes.
Oh my God, yeah.
Should we? Not yet. But final point, Chuck, what we ought to do is give the Ukrainians the ability to create a no-fly zone, more Stingers, more missiles that can go higher than Stingers, and above all, consummate this fighter deal, get those MiG-29s in their hands.
Do our NATO allies that have these Russian jets have enough of them to give the Ukrainians a chance at air superiority?
Yes. And
Wow.
and by the way, take a look at NATO combat aircraft. We have over 25,000. Russian combat aircraft, around 5,000.
What he's saying here is important because it gets back to the point I was making before. Is on the one hand, everyone's saying that if we let Putin win, and Ukraine is going to invade the rest of Europe. But look at what the admiral says here. Sorry, I'm having trouble with that word. I do
You
not
just
admire
admire
it.
him.
The one
so
is an
much.
alliance.
Let's back
All
up.
right,
a little
rewind
bit.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Russian combat aircraft, around 5,000. We outnumber them 5-1 as an alliance. Hey, we outspend them 15-1. We outnumber them in ground troops 4-1. He's not going to cross a NATO border in anger, but we ought to do all that we can to support the Ukrainians.
You hear that? He's not going to cross a NATO border because we outspend them by such a huge amount, and we outgun them by such a huge amount. So this propaganda.
But he's going
line
to
that
take over Europe.
Exactly.
Somehow. There's a way. There's
Yeah.
like a NATO loop. There's a little NATO loophole or a little place where there's no border
Exactly.
that he could travel through.
Exactly. So the fallacy of that whole argument is exposed right there as he brags about how much more we spend on weapons than Russia, which is absolutely true, and how much just in size, military-wise, NATO is. But what he's really advocating for is essentially using Ukrainians as cannon fodder.
Cannon fodder, right?
Because he knows that Russia has overwhelming military dominance over Ukraine. And so he just wants to send in more and more weapons to bog Russia down, similar to what the U.S. did the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. Even though everyone knows that Russia will eventually win, whether it takes a few weeks or a few years. But the outcome is going to be the exact same. And these people just want to use Ukraine to bleed Russia in the process and basically fight Russia to the last Ukrainian.
Right. It's so disgusting. And people who think they're defending Ukrainians by arming them, and encouraging them to fight are mistaken. It's very sad and very scary and very frustrating.
It is.
Because no one is talking about it that way in the media. Yeah. Okay. Next.
Vladimir Putin has said that sanctions amount to a declaration of war. They are impacting his economy, but they're not stopping his military. When will sanctions stop the fight?
Margaret, the impact of the sanctions is already devastating, which is presumably why he said what he said. But at the same time, we continue to see President Putin doubling down and digging in on this aggression against Ukraine. That's continuing. And I think we have to be prepared, unfortunately, tragically, for this to go on for some time.
NATO has said none of its 30 members are willing to set up
a... That's something he kept repeating on the Sunday morning news shows. Like, this is going to take a while. So
yes,
buckle up.
Yep.
Yeah.
And also he tacitly acknowledges that the sanctions he's imposing, which are crippling Russia's economy, causing huge hardships for average Russian civilians, will not do anything to stop the actual war, because that's not the point. The aim is just to make the Russian people suffer and force them into enough misery that they rise up and turn against their government, which is what the U.S. has been trying in Cuba for decades, and Iran, Venezuela. Although now in Venezuela, they have to go back on that because they need Venezuela's oil. So this weekend, Biden sent some officials to go meet with President Maduro. All of a sudden, who they acknowledge now is the president of Venezuela. So bye-bye, Juan Guaido.
Yeah, what about Guaido?
Just
That's
got
so
cooed.
sad.
Guaido just got cooed by his own coup backers.
Yeah.
So yeah, but that's the part that this thing about the sanctions, which everyone is supposed to support because it's non-military, so it's supposed to be this humane way. The aim is to inflict suffering on Russian civilians, which is exactly what it's doing.
Right.
Putin will be fine.
No-fly zone. President Biden has been very clear he has no interest in that or combat troops. But what more can the United States do here? If, for instance, the Polish government, a NATO member, wants to send fighter jets, does that get a green light from the U.S., or are you afraid that that will escalate tension?
No, that gets a green light. In fact, we're talking with our Polish friends right now about what we might be able to do to backfill their needs if, in fact, they choose to provide these fighter jets to the Ukrainians. What could we do? How can we help to make sure that they get something to backfill the planes that they're handing over to the Ukrainians? We're in very
help us help you.
These are the questions that pass for journalism in the U.S. media, not what right do we have to try to fuel
No, of
a
course not.
proxy war on Russia's borders and expand a hostile military alliance there. Should we maybe reconsider this policy of using Ukraine as cannon fodder? No, the only question is, how effective are we being in using Ukraine as cannon fodder, and can we do more to send them
Right.
more weapons?
And let other people join in.
Yeah.
How about Poland?
How about Poland? Why not? Yeah, let's get Poland in there.
Yeah.
Through discussions with them about that. Look, I've been in Europe for the last couple of days, working closely, as always, with our allies and partners at NATO, the European Union, the G7 countries, and all of us together are continuing to take steps to increase the pressure on Russia through additional sanctions, all of which are very actively under discussion and will be implemented in the coming days, as well as taking further steps to give the Ukrainians what they need to defend themselves against the Russian aggression.
Proxy war.
Yeah.
Proxy war.
Yeah.
Man, oh man. Okay. What's next?
What's next? We got some Jake Tapper.
Oh,
By the
okay.
way,
Yeah, here we go.
State
So
of the Union. By the way, very exciting news. I just realized when I was looking at their clips, State of the Union, CNN State of the Union follows me
wow.
on Twitter.
Well, maybe they're big fans of Monday Morning.
I think they probably are. Yeah.
Well, to our colleagues at State of the Union, we wish you a warm welcome. We
Yes. Hi.
salute your work.
Hi, State of the Union. Hi, Jake.
We're big fans.
We know you're watching.
And we
yeah.
welcome into the Monday Morning community. You're welcome. Here.
Yes. You're welcome. Yeah. All right. Let's see what he has to say.
And Russian military barbarism
Can you rewind?
unfolding before our eyes in Ukraine is horrifying, and the road to it was partly paved with 2 decades of misplaced optimism, appeasement, and Western leaders too eager to look the other way when it came to Vladimir Putin. While born from no doubt
It's a little quiet. I guess
I don't think we can change
that's
it,
as loud
though.
those we got. All right.
Yeah.
We'll have to make do.
well-intentioned desire to welcome Russia into the global community, that desire seemed to often block out the obvious warning signs. One of Putin's
All right. So this is a long sermon, and we're not going to play all of it because it's
Yeah, but we got to play a little bit.
But basically, just to set it up for people, what Jake is saying here, this is like a sermon that Jake is basically accusing us of being hoodwinked. We were so well-intentioned in trying to bring Russia into the global community that we looked the other way as the evil Russia tried to to exploit our goodwill and our generosity for its imperial aims. That's the message of Jake Tapper's sermon here.
We were too soft on Russia.
We're too soft on Russia, yes. Even as we expanded a hostile military alliance to its borders, even as we tore up the vital arms control treaties that limited the weapon stockpiles of the U.S. and Russia, even as we built missile systems inside Poland aimed at Russia and lied by saying that we needed to build them there to protect Europe from Iranian missiles, even as we got Russia to basically not block a no-fly zone in Libya and then use that to go and destroy Libya. You can go on and on and on and on and on, and we'll have more opportunities to point them out as Jake proceeds to rant.
Putin's first actions as president in early 2000 was to level the Chechen capital city of Grayzone. So much so that the UN was reportedly still calling it the most destroyed city on earth years later. Thousands of civilians were killed. And how did the U.S. respond? With stern warnings and a friendly presidential summit.
I think that the United States can do business with this man. What I have seen of him so far indicates to me that he's capable of being a very strong and effective and straightforward leader.
President Clinton was the first American leader to see.
Yes, this is true. Russia committed massive atrocities in Chechnya, which was a very, very brutal war, which the U.S. initially supported, I believe. But regardless, the reason why Clinton was saying nice things about Vladimir Putin initially back then is because the U.S. hoped, in the words of Nick Kristof, that essentially Putin would just be a sober Yeltsin. Yeltsin was a drunk, but what he did is he implemented U.S.-designed shock therapy that destroyed Russia's economy, created the oligarch system that currently prevails, basically, and Russian life expectancy dropped to record levels. And the U.S. cheered all this on because this was very profitable for U.S. hedge fund managers and corporations that were profiting off of the pillage of Russia's economy. And Yeltsin was basically a putz. Talbot, who was a close aide to Bill Clinton, joked in his memoirs about how behind Yeltsin's back, him and Clinton would joke about how much shit they were shoving in Yeltsin's face. And so basically Clinton, when Putin came in, was just hoping, in the words of Nick Kristof, for a sober Yeltsin, a guy who would do the same thing,
right,
be another U.S. puppet.
without it having a drinking problem. Yeah.
So that's why Clinton was saying nice things about Putin back then.
A potential partner in Putin, but he was far from the last.
I looked the man in the eye.
This was a funny moment.
I found him to be very straightforward and trustworthy. I was able to get a sense of his soul.
Amid warnings from the likes of Senator John McCain and Gary Kasparov that Putin could simply not be trusted.
This is what always comes back to, Katie.
Two.
John McCain in foreign policy is always right.
Yeah.
That is the overarching message of CNN and MSNBC these days. That John McCain, the guy who wanted to bomb Iran, who called Vietnamese gooks, who supported every single war.
Refused to stop doing that.
That he was the sage who we all ignored. That's the overarching message here of all this stuff. And again, the reason why Bush saw into Putin's soul and said he saw a good person was because they were hoping that Putin would be another client like Yeltsin. And the moment Putin started being defiant is when he became an arch enemy.
He could no longer see his soul.
Exactly right.
His soul had shriveled, or maybe it was never there. Yeah.
President Bush nonetheless pushed on for a new beginning with Russia, despite Grayzone, despite the 2004 poisoning of pro-Western Ukrainian presidential candidate Viktor Yushchenko, who survived the poisoning and suspected the Kremlin was to blame, despite the 2006 death by radiation poisoning of Putin critic Alexander Litvinenko. You may succeed in silencing one man, Litvinenko said from his deathbed, but the howl of protest from around the world will reverberate, Mr. Putin, in your ears for the rest of your life. But tragically, that howl evaporated. The UK responded to a brazen assassination on its soil by expelling 4 Russian diplomats. That's it.
That's because actually, this is a long, complicated story, but the evidence tying this to Putin is actually very, very thin. And you can read Stephen F. Cohen has written all about that, his work. And these allegations, though, did serve the agenda of those who wanted to break Russian ties to the West. So I'm very skeptical of these allegations. Doesn't mean that Putin is a nice guy. I'm sure he's responsible for all sorts of criminal things, including against critics. But in the case of this former Russian spy who was killed, I think the evidence is actually very, 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 very sketchy. But that's another, But that's the point of these allegations. They require long research projects, and all of them serve a purpose of basically supporting sanctions on Russia and justifying aggression towards it. That's the overarching thing.
Yeah, and if you question them at all, or question who is responsible for them, or just ask for evidence, you're being a Putinist puppet.
Yeah.
Also, what does Jake Tapper want us to do with this nuclear power?
That's a great question, which he would not answer.
Yeah, they never.
In 2008, Putin, emboldened, invaded neighboring Georgia using the pretense of protecting the rights of Russian-speaking separatists, which is now his playbook.
Okay, this is again more John McCain propaganda. What actually happened was, and this is now documented, look up the reports by the OSCE, which show conclusively that Georgia actually attacked South Ossetia first in an effort to actually provoke Russia. And he was encouraged to do that by Dick Cheney and other people in Cheney's orbit. Other people in the Bush administration, including reportedly George Bush himself, told Saakashvili, the president of Georgia, not to do it and said, we're not going to go to World War III over you. Saakashvili listened to Cheney and attacked South Ossetia first, and Russia, as everybody predicted they would, reacted and humiliated John McCain and Dick Cheney, who had cheered this on. And then now it's still the subject of revisionist history. It's discussed in a new book by Andrew Coburn called Spoils of War, which, but again, this is just a thing where this is a classic example of manufacturing consent, where there's a propaganda line it's decreed to be what actually happened, and nobody questions it. Everyone just repeats it without looking at the actual history.
Russia has invaded a sovereign neighboring state and threatens a democratic government elected by its people. Such an action is unacceptable in the 21st century.
Unacceptable. So how did President Bush punish Putin for this bloody invasion of a sovereign nation? Nothing.
Okay, do you hear that? Jake Tapper wants George W. Bush, to punish somebody else for a bloody invasion of a sovereign nation.
Wow. I hope he doesn't punish himself.
Well, it's like, can that thought ever pierce Jake Tapper's head?
No.
That who is George Bush to punish anybody else for a bloody invasion of a sovereign nation when he launched the bloodiest invasion of a sovereign nation of the century?
So stupid. It's just so dumb. And
So
like Condi Rice said the same thing, right? Just no awareness.
Just last week. Yep.
Yeah. It's because it's our lane. You know what I'm saying? This is our lane. We're the ones who are supposed to invade countries in bloody violations of sovereignty. That's what we do. Yeah. Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
Not even economic sanctions. Something former Bush National Security Advisor Stephen Hadley told me 6 years later was a mistake. In 2008, Ukrainian-born tax advisor Sergei Magnitsky alleged massive corruption by the Russian government. He was thrown in jail while Bush was president, and he died in prison not long after Obama's famous or infamous Russian reset began. So willing to work with Putin, often despite NATO's fears.
Magnitsky was treated horribly in prison. Horribly. But the story there is actually a lot more complicated than Jake Tapper presents it. And it's basically been exploited by this guy named Bill Browder, who's a hedge fund billionaire who made a lot of money pillaging Russia in the 1990s, back when he was buddies with Putin initially, because he was making a lot of money off of him. And Bill Browder has basically used the death of Magnitsky inside Russian prison to advocate all sorts of sanctions on Russia. And the reason why is because Browder was targeted by Putin when Putin tried to restrain somewhat the oligarch system that Browder profited off of. Now, of course, Putin created a new class of oligarchs who are crooks as well, and Putin is a crook. But Browder, who's also a crook, is mad at Putin because Putin basically cut Browder out of the robbery. So that's why Magnitsky is a thing, and that's why we have sanctions on Russia.
Named after him, right?
Yeah. And there's a great movie on this called The Magnitsky Act Behind the Scenes. And it's by a Russian filmmaker who initially saw Bill Browder as a hero, but then as he started to interview him and study him, realized he was a complete fraud who was basically manufacturing claims to justify crushing sanctions on Russia. And that's available online for anyone who's interested.
Oh, cool. I want to watch it.
Remember the 2012 Obama hot mic moment with Putin's short-term successor, Dmitry Medvedev, about Putin's objections to U.S. missile defense systems protecting NATO allies?
This is my last place for you. Yeah, after my election, I have more flexibility. Yeah, I understand. I transmit this information to Vladimir and understand that.
Obama's opponent.
Yes, this is Jake Tapper. He's now making apologies and defense for George W. Bush's agenda of building missile systems, what he says, to protect our NATO allies. I talked about this earlier, where basically Bush in 2002 with John Bolton, who Jake Tapper is also promoting here essentially, ripped up the anti-ballistic missile treaty and started building these new missile sites inside places like Poland and Romania, aimed totally at Russia, claimed they needed it to help defend Europe from Iran. And Jake Tapper is outraged that Obama floated the possibility of rolling some of that back.
Just awful. Just it's anti-patriotic. It's un-American. It's treasonous.
Well, it is anti-patriotic in the sense that these places host Patriot missiles, I think.
Oh, yeah.
So, in that sense, it is.
Should we go to the next clip? How much more of this do you want
to
watch?
you want? Okay, fine. Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, this goes on forever. Basically, he goes on to say how Mitt Romney was right.
Right.
John McCain was right. Yeah. That's the point.
Such a jingoist. What a useful jingoist.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, everyone, what are you guys doing? Hit the like, guys. I'm not afraid to ask for that. Hit the like. If you don't hit the like, you're letting all the terrorists win all over the world, especially Pod Save America. All right. Next.
We're joined now by Kurt Volcker. He was a former U.S. envoy to Ukraine and former U.S. ambassador to NATO, and he joins us now. Thank you for.
Unmentioned is that Kurt Volcker was a consultant for a group called BMG. And guess who BMG worked for? Oh, sorry, BGR. And guess who BGR worked for?
Does it rhyme with Schmathion?
It rhymes with Schmathion. They're a company called Raytheon who manufacture Javelin missiles that are being sent to Ukraine right now, which Kurt Volcker has promoted and also profited off of. Of course, I'm not going to mention that he is a war profiteer because that's a bit inconvenient.
Totally irrelevant. Yeah.
Yeah.
For coming on the program. You've been arguing for a no-fly zone over Ukraine. NATO says that's off the table. The United States, no way, no how, no combat troops. Because President Biden says this would trigger World War III. Why is he wrong?
Well, I think there are ways to do this that mitigate those risks. It doesn't eliminate the risk, but it mitigates the risk of direct conflict with Russia.
So my proposal, in Kurt Volcker's words, doesn't eliminate the risk of World War III, but I still want to risk it then. That's what he's basically saying. I want to risk World War III.
Yeah. What is life without some risk? If you haven't risked anything, you haven't lived. You know what I'm saying?
Why not? Live a little.
Live a little. YOLO. You only live once.
Yeah.
First off, I think we have to recognize that the civilian casualties and the horrific scenes that we just saw are going to get worse. They're not going to get better. There's going to be massive airstrikes against Kyiv, against other cities, and it's going to be absolutely devastating. So if we can prevent that from a humanitarian point of view, I think we need to try. And the way to do this that I would recommend is we make clear the humanitarian purposes. We limit the scope geographically to Kyiv and Western Ukraine, so we're not getting close to Russian borders. We make clear that we will only fire if fired upon on any ground targets. We are not there to strike anything. We make clear to the Russian military that we will not strike their aircraft or their helicopters as long as they stay outside the zone. Mm-hmm. And then there are rules of engagement that our Air Force and others are very good at of escorting people out of a zone without fire if they're not fired upon. And I think we apply all of those things in order to try to create a safe space for the civilians.
So other former ambassadors to NATO have.
I mean, he's calling for World War III. And he thinks somehow that can be avoided if you have U.S. military planes and anti-missile battalions in the same zone as Russia. He thinks, yeah, we could probably avoid World War III. I can't guarantee it, but we probably can. He can't entertain.
Worth a shot.
He can't entertain that maybe we should just agree to Russia's demands, which is keep Ukraine neutral. They're not asking for Ukraine to join the Russian orbit and recognize the breakaway republics, which is, I wish that could have been solved a long time ago, but the talks over that have stalled for now 7 years. And so Russia is finally laying down a hard line there. And this is going to be the result anyway of a war. So, but they can't entertain this now because they don't want to look weak, I suppose. So they'd rather than looking weak, they'd rather risk a world war. Wilson, I have that tweet underneath this that explains a bit more about Volcker and his role in selling weapons. If you want to grab it, but we can keep watching this clip.
Made the public argument that this is unrealistic because you would have to take out Russian systems not only in Ukraine but long-range ones inside Russia. You go to war like this.
You don't do that because that does bring us directly into the fight. Russia does not want us in the fight. And I think we are letting Putin get inside our heads and deter us from doing things to protect civilians, rather than taking into account that he does not want the U.S. or other countries supporting Ukraine.
So if the goal ultimately, diplomatically, is to stop the carnage and stop the war, how do you get Vladimir Putin to back down? Who can actually do that? Because the Germans tried, the French tried, the Israelis tried. No one's got any success. The U.S. is talking to China. Who can do this?
The Ukrainian people can do this. The Ukrainian people are there. They are determined. They are fighting. We are fortunate that we don't have to be in a position of fighting Putin or trying to stop him. The Ukrainian people can do this. Ukrainian people are there. They are determined.
So listen what he said here. Them over here.
And they are fighting. We are fortunate that we don't have to be in a position of fighting Putin or trying to stop him. The Ukrainian people are ready to do this.
You hear that? We are fortunate
Yeah.
that we're not the Ukrainians who we put in this position by using them as cannon fodder for the last 8 years in a proxy war against Russia. So it's like we put them in this position. We've used them to fight Russia in a war that's been going on for now 8 years now, 14,000 people killed, arming them, sending in billions of dollars worth of weapons. And we're fortunate, he says, that we're not them.
We're blessed.
We're blessed. He's being honest. We're fortunate that
Yeah.
we get to use them as tools and we get to sit back and watch
Right.
and watch everyone suffer while we profit off of it. And by the way, so let's look at that.
They're there. They're there. They're happy to do it.
They're happy to do it. Yeah. Ukrainians love being sacrificial lambs for NATO. Let's look at that tweet, Wilson, just to give you an idea of Volcker's judgment. So this is back in 2019. So Volcker was working at the State Department as the envoy for Ukraine while also keeping his job with BGR. So click on the photo. Volcker started his job. Okay, yeah. So this is from the Washington Post in 2019. Volcker started his job at the State Department in 2017 in an unusual part-time arrangement that allowed him to continue consulting at BGR, a powerful lobbying firm that represents Ukraine and Raytheon. During his tenure, Volcker advocated for the U.S. to send Ukraine Raytheon-manufactured anti-tank Javelin missiles, a decision that made the missile firm millions of dollars. BGR has said Volcker recused himself from all Ukraine-related matters in response to criticisms about conflicts of interest. So yes, Volcker was still working for the firm that was profiting off of selling missiles to Ukraine, while Volcker, as a State Department official, was advocating selling missiles to Ukraine. But Katie, no worries.
Himself.
He recused himself. It's all good.
It's all good. Yeah.
Yeah.
He totally. Yeah. There's now no ulterior motives.
No.
Yeah. Noted. Present. Yeah. Thank God he has that moral compass to guide him.
All right, we can move on from Kurt.
So disgusting. This is just so crazy and scary. You know, we don't have state. I mean, we do have some state-sponsored media, but the scariest media bias that we have is corporate sponsored media and arms industry sponsored media.
Yeah. I mean, look, Katie, when you guys named this Monday Morning, what a dead-on name to call this show, because it really is mourning the state of the world in and how scary it is and how corrupt it is.
So
well, we do have a break with this next guy coming up. I think everybody will be as excited as possible.
Okay.
The United States purchases about 600,000 barrels of Russian petroleum products a day. Speaker Pelosi said that oil should be banned. The White House says it's looking at options. What is that option? Does the solution come from Congress, or is this something President Biden needs to act on?
I think it could come from either place. I think there's very strong bipartisan support to cut off Russian oil and gas sales to the United States. It's anathema, I think, to many of us in Congress that while we were sanctioning them and trying to cripple their economy, that we would help them in any way by purchasing their petroleum. But I think the administration wants to make sure that we work with our allies. This will have an impact potentially on global oil prices, including here at home, where in Los Angeles now gas is over $5 a gallon. So he wants to make sure that we understand the impact on the global supply. But
you know, Katie, we all have our public figure who triggers us. For me, it's Adam Schiff.
Yeah.
He is the one who does it for me. Just the sound of his voice, and I just get angry.
And chills up your spine.
Yeah. Who is it for you?
Who is it for me? Gorsuch.
Really? No.
Can't stand his
Gorsuch,
voice.
Yeah. Gorsuch just sounds angry all the time.
He sounds angry. Yeah, but he sounds like he's pretending not to be. That's what I hate. This passive aggressive fake.
I'm chill.
He's the worst.
Yeah.
I hate him. I hate his voice. Yeah.
I think there is strong support to show solidarity with Ukraine, but also to make sure that American dollars aren't supporting the Russian war machine in any way.
How
Just
quickly
the
does
US
that
war
need to
machine.
happen? I mean, this is Putin's lifeline. It's a cash cow.
Well, I think we'd like to act on it very quickly. At the same time, we have to be circumspect about the fact that Russia will probably find somewhere else to sell that oil and gas to. So the impact ultimately on Russia may not be as powerful as we would like. It's why we have to continue to explore additional ways to really crush the Russian economy. But I have to say,
Listen how casually he says that. We have to explore additional ways to crush
Yeah, of course.
Russia's economy. It's taken for granted that we have the right to do that. Imagine someone saying that about the U.S. Imagine Russia saying we're trying to crush the U.S. economy. And when you crush an economy, who suffers? It's not the elite.
It's definitely
people.
just the oligarchs. Definitely just the oligarchs. The richest people suffer. The normal people are totally shielded. Yeah.
Face to status.
Face to status. Yeah.
enormously impressed with how the world has come together, with how here in...
By the way, side note, how many times do they have to show us that it's Face the Nation? We have Face the Nation in the bottom left, and we got another Face the Nation. We have 4 Face the Nations on the screen.
Yeah, seriously. They have like an inferiority complex here.
Yeah. Just give us one. Two at the most.
2 at tops. Yeah.
Yeah.
Congress, in a very partisan Congress, Democrats and Republicans are uniting around this tough sanction package, as well as providing more defensive military support to Ukraine. There is enormous solidarity with the brave people of Ukraine.
This guy has so much responsibility for what's going on right now. Recall, he was the leading Russiagate crusader who normalized in Americans' minds that Russia was this demonic state hell-bent on destroying U.S. democracy via
the reason Trump was president.
The reason Trump was president via social media bots and email hackers. He helped criminalize diplomacy with Russia. He led an impeachment against Trump, partly based on the fact that, in his words, Trump had endangered national security by momentarily pausing some weapons to Ukraine. And he said, as we played before on the show, that the U.S. arms Ukraine so that we fight Russia over there. So essentially, he was celebrating
instead of fighting them over here.
Instead of fighting them over here. So he was celebrating the fact that the U.S. is using Ukraine to fight Russia over there. And now he's somehow outraged when Russia, in a really catastrophic and illegal way, fights back. And no one will ever try to hold him to account for everything he's done. But he is of all the people in Congress and in the Beltway who have responsibility, he's at the top. All right. That's enough
Crushing the
shift.
economy. Yeah, it's enough shift. He's full of shift. Okay, what's next? Donbass voice?
Oh, well, you know what? I wanted to play something different, Katie.
Yeah.
This is not from the Sunday shows, but just to give people some kind of balance. Yesterday on my show on Colin.
Oh yeah, that was great.
Someone called in who is he's a native of the Donbass, and this is the region of eastern Ukraine that's been at war for the last 7+ years. And his point was that for his people in eastern Ukraine who've been under constant shelling by the Ukrainian military with U.S. support in a proxy war that Adam Schiff and Kurt Volcker and John McCain and all these other people have supported. For them, the war started a long time ago. And so I thought it was interesting to get his perspective on this stage of the war from the eyes of someone who's lived through it in the Donbass for the last 8 years. So I wanted to just play a little bit of what he said.
So I saw things firsthand that were happening there. And, so the other day I saw a poster in front of someone's house saying, "Pray for Ukraine." And in no way do I support any civilians being caught up in this kind of thing because I've seen what happens. But, for many people, the war started, 8-10 days ago? For people there, it's been going on for almost 8 years now. And in 2016, it was July 10th, and I remember that date. Clearly, I was in the city of Golinkin. It was shelled by Ukrainian troops. It was around the railroad station, Nikhitovka railroad station. I took pictures, just wanted to see it for myself, what happened, the aftermath. And a few days later, an article in Newsweek came out saying, and it was titled, Putin invades Ukraine as NATO bolsters defense. And to me, at that point, it was just a breaking moment. I realized that the media slanted things and biased them really heavily. But this time just made me realize that, what they show to people here in the United States and in Europe and what happens on the ground, there are completely different things, to the point of, it's just, there's no truth in it. It's not just bias, it's lies, right? So I still have relatives living there. I talked to my cousin today. The city of Gorlovka was shelled again, residential areas today, and so was Donetsk. And
the transcription is a little off there. It's not Donetsk, it's Donetsk.
Right.
But anyway, yeah, for people watching.
Here in the media, you don't hear much about that, if anything at all, right? So you see these horrific scenes of civilians fleeing in mainland Ukraine. You don't see anything that's going on in Donbass, but it is still being heavily shelled, right? Especially cities that are like up in the north, Gorlovka, Donetsk, then Volnovakha in the south. That's where, I guess a lot of fighting is happening now. Mariupol is surrounded. But I just, those people living there in that region have no voice. Like I said, I saw the sign saying "Pray for Ukraine," but it's not just. What is Ukraine? They consider.
So I just wanted to highlight him because he is what, and I write about this in a new article on my Substack, which we'll link to, just talking about for Ukrainians like this guy, whose name is Vladimir. The war started 8 years ago, but they've been ignored, even as 14,000 people have died. The majority, I think, you can plausibly argue, on the pro-Russian rebel-held side. We don't hear about them because they're what Chomsky and Edward Herman called unworthy victims.
Right.
They're victims killed with our support. So they don't count. And there have been efforts to negotiate a peace deal in the Donbass. It was reached 7 years ago, called the Minsk Accords, but the U.S. and Ukraine have essentially ignored them. And that's because the Minsk Accords would essentially take NATO membership off of the table. So because of this bid to get Ukraine into this hostile military alliance on Russia's borders, we've had a war for 8 years. Now it's escalated to this awful point now where Putin has taken this reckless, illegal, criminal, murderous decision to invade. But the point is, if you don't want Ukrainians to suffer, then first of all, you have to recognize that this war didn't start with Putin's invasion. And you have to advocate the only solution that's on the table to stop it, which is basically keeping Ukraine neutral and stopping, by the way, to flood Ukraine with weapons from the U.S. that only keep this war going. But we're not allowed to hear those voices because they're inconvenient.
Right. Isn't he also, didn't he say he was half Russian?
He's half Russian, half Ukrainian. That's the status for millions of people inside the Donbass. And that's why they took up arms in 2014, because what happened was you had a U.S.-backed coup that installed a government that was dominated by the far right, because that's who basically led the coup. It was preceded by these protests that were not far right. They were tens of thousands of Ukrainians basically protesting corruption in the Yanukovych government and calling for integration of Ukraine into Europe. But these protests got co-opted by members of the far right with U.S. support, and they led a coup. And after that, the coup mongers, the coup government, launched a crackdown on Ukrainian Russian speakers like Vladimir here. And people in the Donbass took up arms because they didn't want to live under a coup government that was trying to erase their culture. And the U.S. basically got behind the policy of using this as a proxy war to, in Adam Schiff's words, fight Russia over there.
Didn't also, you know what, I saw that I watched Ukraine on Fire last week, and I didn't know that Yushchenko, who was the kind of pro-Western Ukrainian president, right, who was poisoned and survived, he gave some honorary title to Stepan Bandera, who was a Ukrainian Nazi.
Yes, of course. That's who the U.S. has sided with, are far-right fascist forces. That's who led the coup. There's a clip of a fascist leader bragging about that. It was published by Alex Rubinstein, who writes a lot for the Grayzone, where he says that if not for the neo-Nazis in the Maidan protests, that Maidan would have turned into a gay pride parade.
Right.
He's bragging about that.
Yeah. Also on PBS, this isn't on Sunday morning news, but here, I can screen share actually. Let me just screen share something. There is an interview on PBS that I think we should show people with the mayor of Konotop, Artem Semenikin. And I'm sorry if I'm misspelling it, but mispronouncing it. Let me just do a screen share. Okay. Okay, can you guys hear that? I didn't share it yet. Hold on. Where is it? Here it is. Okay. So look who's in the background. You're not going to know if you don't know what this Stepan Bandera looks like.
Do you fear that they'll come back and either occupy or try and destroy the city?
Yes, of course we are concerned, and this concern is not groundless. There's a big unit near our town, and using the weapons they have, they could destroy our town. But we are not afraid. We are ready to fight till the end, till the victorious end, to defeat these Russian cockroaches.
Cockroaches.
After the Russians left, he rallied his troops, civilians, ready to resist.
All of our cities are like this. All of our Ukraine is like this. We have weapons in our hands, we have armed up, and we are ready to kill occupiers.
Okay, so it's blurred, but then there's a glitch, and you can see Stepan Bandera, who again is a Ukrainian Nazi.
To kill occupiers. And thanks to the United States of America for supporting Ukraine with weapons. My weapon is American, and I think the occupiers will be pleased that we're killing them with American weapons.
Do you fear that they'll come back and either occupy?
So as Alan McLeod tweeted, PBS NewsHour interviews the mayor of Konotop, Artem Semenikin, presenting him as a hero for killing Russian invaders. However, despite his Zoom blur effect, you can clearly still see that behind him is a portrait of Nazi leader and Holocaust perpetrator Stepan Bandera. Now, do you think he really thought that he could hide that guy? Because my thinking is why don't you just have a different background? Then I was like, maybe he was just really messy and he had a lot of mess behind him. So he blurred it for that reason, not even to cover up Bandera.
Yeah, it might not even occur to him that it's bad to show off that you have a Nazi portrait hanging on your wall. Or maybe is it possible also that PBS blurred it, that they were the ones who did the interview and they're like, oh shit, maybe we shouldn't feature a Nazi in this guy we're trying to portray as a hero?
But do you think they even know who he is? That's the thing.
That's a good question. Yeah,
because as we know from Richard Engel, he showed Azov Battalion without knowing it.
Yes. Yeah. But that's, look, when Putin talks about Ukraine being a Nazi-run country and his denazification, he's overblowing the number of Nazis inside Ukraine. Number-wise, they're not that much. But the point is, what is true though is they do have a outsized role in the government. They led the coup in 2014. After the coup, far-right neo-Nazi people were appointed to senior cabinet positions, including to top security positions. They carried out things like the Odessa massacre in May 2014, which is a massacre we're not allowed to talk about, but basically anti-Maidan protesters had an encampment in the city of Odessa. They were protesting the coup government. They were burned alive. Dozens of them were burned alive.
Yeah.
And people who tried to escape the building were beaten by a crowd that included a leading member of the far right who was in the Ukrainian government at the time, this guy Parubi, who's a neo-Nazi. And that they played a huge role. That's why the Azov Battalion, a neo-Nazi battalion, is officially incorporated into the armed forces. That's why John Conyers, the late Congress member, tried to ban U.S. military support for the Azov Battalion because he didn't want U.S. weapons going there. That's why Barack Obama resisted everybody, including Joe Biden, telling him to arm Ukraine after the proxy war broke out in 2014. And Obama, to his credit, resisted all that. So he didn't want to further inflame the war and he didn't want to arm far-right fascists. But now Obama's position is now a fringe position. And we're all supposed to get behind arming these people and fueling a proxy war that we helped to start. And, fast forward to now, Zelensky campaigned on a peace platform. He was going to implement the Minsk Accords. But then a few things happened. Basically, He tried to get far-right militants in the Donbass to stop fighting and to pull back. And they told him to go away, and they laughed at him. And other members of the far right threatened to coup him the same way there was a coup in 2014. And some even threatened to kill him. And he could have possibly pushed through his peace mandate if he had had some backing from the U.S. But the U.S. policy has essentially been to side with the far right, to reject the Minsk Accords, to reject diplomacy, and lead to the situation that we're in now. So that's where, although I think Zelensky is not the character he's being portrayed as in the U.S. media, he's now portrayed as a hero because he's essentially letting his country be sacrificed for NATO. He does deserve some sympathy because he did try to make peace by running on it and then got threatened with his life when he came into office.
Right. What would that have looked like had the U.S. had his back, let's say, in pursuing peace? What would that have looked like logistically?
It's kind of like in Indonesia under Bill Clinton, when Clinton finally said to the dictatorship of Indonesia, all right, time to stop occupying East Timor. Indonesia immediately followed orders. That's when you're a U.S. client, the U.S. has overwhelming leverage over your country. And if the U.S. really wanted to make peace happen, it could simply threaten to withhold military aid, financial aid,
right,
diplomatic support, as has been done before. Joe Biden did that and got a prosecutor fired, who, by the way, was investigating Burisma, the company where Hunter Biden got his board seat, and the prosecutor was fired. So if the U.S. would use its diplomatic leverage for the cause of peace, rather than trying to protect, rather than trying to, fire a prosecutor as Joe Biden did, or in the case of Trump, trying to influence Ukraine into investigating or saying some disparaging things about Joe Biden, then that would have a huge influence. And the far right, I think, would be in a much weaker position.
Well, because at the very least, right, there'd be like a counterforce pressuring Zelensky.
Yeah. Instead, Zelensky, when he came into office, and I've written about this, one of Zelensky's first moves after Joe Biden came into office in early 2021, he banned 3 pro-Russian opposition television networks. So like the 3 leading opposition TV stations inside Ukraine, Zelensky took them off of the air. And a top Zelensky aide told Time magazine that was a welcome gift to Biden. So it's clear what the Biden agenda was.
That's censorship. I thought we don't like when countries do that.
Well, unless our clients do it, then it's good.
Oh, got it. Okay. Got it. Yeah. What about the claim I've heard, but there can't be neo-Nazi factions because Zelensky's Jewish?
Well, there's a new article about this I recommend by Max Blumenthal and Alex Rubinstein at the Grayzone, thegrayzone.com. And it's basically about how, as I was talking about, Zelensky ran on a peace platform, and he came into office, and Ukrainian neo-Nazis threatened his life. And he was in a position where the U.S. was not giving him enough support to implement his peace platform. And so he basically reached an accommodation with the neo-Nazis. And now he's essentially at their mercy because there's no countervailing force to help him out.
And someone else responded to something I said with being like, oh, look at this study that shows that Ukrainians are less anti-Semitic than other comparable countries. But again, no one's saying that the entire country is overrun by neo-Nazis. It's that there is an armed right-wing neo-Nazi faction that has disproportionate power.
Exactly. It's it's an incredibly small percentage of the country. They just happen to have a lot of power.
Yeah.
Because, by the way, that's who the U.S. has empowered since 2014, since it backed a coup that helped put these people in power.
Right. And they literally have a battalion in the army.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes.
Anyway.
Read up on this. There's an article by Ukrainian-American journalist Lev Golinkin. I'm pronouncing his last name wrong. I'm sorry, Lev. But it's called Neo-Nazis Are on the March in Ukraine. It's in the Nation magazine. Appeared a few years ago.
Yeah.
We'll add a link to it. You can read about it.
Yeah. So now should we go over to Colin?
Let's go over to Colin. Thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for liking, for tuning in. Yeah. Got a lot of people here today. We appreciate that. Make sure you become subscribers at usefulidiots.substack.com. You get extended interviews, bonus interviews, extended episodes, and ad-free content. So we'll see you at Colin. What were you going to say something, Aaron?
Oh yeah, just if you like the show we do, if you appreciate Monday Morning, we'd love your support at usefulideas.substack.com. It helps us continue to do it and make it free for everybody. So
Yes,
thank you,
exactly.
everybody, for supporting us.
Yeah. Okay. My name is spelled IE, but thank you. Not Y. But I'm not being sarcastic. I do really thank you. Okay. Aaron, I'll see you over
Or your
at
name is
Colin.
spelled Karen, Katie.
What?
Or your name is spelled Karen by correcting someone's spelling mistake.
Katya will be there. Thanks. Yeah, I will be there. Katyan Adanovich or something. I have to give you a Russian name. All right. See you guys
So
at
join us on
Colin.
Colin right now, everybody. Hope to see you
Yeah,
there.
and the link is in the YouTube description. All right, and it's a free app. You just have to download if you don't already have it, and then you can ask us questions. Okay.
Bye everybody.
everyone.
See you soon.
Thanks, Wilson.